We are here to do something unusual. Kind of Blue is the best-selling jazz album of all time. Total critical consensus. Every list, every retrospective, every serious discussion of jazz in the 20th century. Everyone agrees. What nobody agrees on is why. That is not a small problem. It is the only problem. This is the first reference episode in this show's history. A reference episode does not celebrate. It performs an autopsy of agreement. We are going to find out what the framework says when the verdict is already in.
I prepared for this episode by pressing play. Just pressing play. And I had the experience I always have, and I still cannot describe it. That's relevant. I want that on the record going in.
March 2, 1959. April 22, 1959. Columbia 30th Street Studio, New York City. 2 sessions. The complete personnel are documented. The recording method is documented. I want to start with facts before this panel decides what the facts mean.
The framework doesn't know about consensus. The 23 variables don't read the critics. That's the test. If this record earns the numbers it earns through the framework is working. If the numbers don't match the external verdict, either the framework is limited or the external verdict is wrong. I want to find out which.
Total critical consensus tells me 100 reviewers agreed. It doesn't tell me what they agreed about. Those are completely different pieces of data. I need the variable breakdown.
So it starts with Paul Chambers on bass alone. 2 notes that interval. And then Bill Evans's piano enters. And the room I'm sitting in becomes a different room. I've had that experience 30, 40 times with this album. It still happens every time. I want to say that before we do anything else. Whatever analysis follows, that thing happens. It happens consistently. And I don't know what it is.
The bass line before the theme. That is the thing people always underestimate. It's not a walking line. It's not introduction in the conventional sense. It's a declaration. It says we are about to move at a different speed than you came in at. Whatever you were carrying when you pressed play, put it down.
Paul Chambers uses a 2-note motive accel as the opening gesture. Jimmy Cobb's brushes enter and establish pulse without stating a downbeat. There is no stated downbeat in the first 30 seconds of So What. That is a deliberate structural choice. You can't land on the one because the one isn't offered. You have to find it yourself.
The thing I can't say, and knew going into this episode that I wouldn't be able to say, is what the specific quality of light is. Not warm light. Not dramatic light. Something at an angle. An afternoon thing. I have been listening to this album for years, and that's as far as I can get. I still cannot explain what So What does to the room when it starts.
Miles Davis was capable of much harder edges than this. Birth of the Cool is cerebral and angular. Bitches Brew 11 years later is almost confrontational. Kind of Blue is the middle Miles. The one who chose to stay open. That is not a passive choice. For Miles Davis, choosing openness was a specific act of will.
2 sessions. March 2 and April 22, 1959. Miles arrived at Columbia 30th Street, each time with sketches. Modal scales, not chord changes, not lead sheets. He handed them to the musicians that morning. Most of what you hear is a first take. The recording method is part of what the record is.
1959. Bebop had been the dominant jazz language for 15 years. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. Improvisation organized at speed around the harmonic structure of standard progressions. Moving through the changes. Miles Davis had been a central figure in that tradition. On March 2, 1959, he walked into that studio and largely stopped doing it.
Ornette Coleman recorded The Shape of Jazz to come the same year. Same question. What comes after bebop? Completely different answer. Coleman went angular, free, dissonant. Miles went spacious. Open. These two records are the fork in the road. And they appeared simultaneously in the same year, from two people working completely independently of each other.
Two completely different exits from the same building in the same year. That is either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence that the question was genuinely in the air. That the pressure had built to the point where multiple people were finding their way out through completely different walls. I leaned toward the latter. The building was too small.
Modal jazz means improvisation on a scale. A mode, rather than movement through chord changes. Instead of tracking a progression, the soloist inhabits a single modal environment for an extended period. So what uses D Dorian for 16 bars, moves to E-flat Dorian for 8 bars, returns to D Dorian for 8. That is the entire harmonic structure of the piece. One scale, then another scale, a half step up, then back. That's it.
What Miles gave up is real and should be said clearly. The harmonic complexity of bebop. The movement through changes, the substitutions, the reharmonizations. All of that goes away. The question is what he received in exchange. He received space. Room to move within a tonal environment without having to track where you are at every bar. The soloists could breathe inside the music rather than running alongside it.
I want to push back on gave up. When I listen to Coltrane on this record, I don't hear absence. I hear arrival. He sounds unlocked. In a way, he doesn't on his bebop recordings. The modal frame gave him somewhere to actually be. That's not a reduction of the music. That is the music.
Miles gave the musicians their sketches on the day of the recording. No rehearsal in the conventional sense. John Coltrane later said he didn't know what the album would sound like until he heard the playback. Cannonball Adderley has said the same. The musicians were not working from a blueprint. They were following instructions given that morning. And they got it right on the first take. So what? D Dorian for 16 bars, E-flat Dorian for 8, back for 8. Miles's trumpet solo is, I want to be careful here, spatially precise. He uses the modal space the way a composer uses silence. The notes he doesn't play are load-bearing. There is a moment in his solo where he holds a single pitch for 4 full counts and then stops. The silence after that hold is doing compositional work.
Freddie Freeloader. This is the blues-adjacent track. The most earthbound thing on the record. And it has a different pianist. Wynton Kelly, not Bill Evans. Kelly plays with more forward motion than Evans does. More weight in the pocket. And somehow the track still belongs to the same album. The ensemble holds it inside the same temperature. That's the ensemble dynamics doing something I don't have a word for.
Blue and grains. The decay on Evans's piano in this track is something I want to name precisely. Notes are allowed to die naturally. No pedal management, no sustain engineering. The recording captures the acoustic bloom of each note inside the room's air. That's Columbia 30th Street's physical dimensions contributing to the sound. You can hear the sailing in the decay. That is not a production accident. That is a production decision.
Blue and Green is also the one. I need to say it here. Evans claimed he wrote Blue and Green, either alone or in collaboration with Miles. Miles gave him no credit on the album. Evans recorded it under his own name within the year. The dispute was never resolved. And when you listen knowing that, something changes. You hear someone's argument inside the music itself.
All blues. 6/8 time. Not a jazz waltz. Not quite anything else. It sits in a meter that is native to blues and gospel, but not to bebop. Myles takes that meter and does something patient with it. All blues sounds like it has already been happening when you press play, and will continue after you stop. That's a particular structural achievement. The track is not complete at its edges.
Jimmy Cobb's brush pattern on all blues is the technical detail I keep returning to. He establishes a quarter note anchor without ever stating the one. The metric framework is present, but not declared. He sustains this for over 11 minutes without letting it slip. That is a difficult technique to execute consistently, and Cobb does it for the full duration.
Flamenco sketches. No fixed meter. The only track where the soloists move through 5 different scales at their own pace. No bar structure, no predetermined form. It's the furthest experiment on the record. And it's quiet. The most structurally ambitious track is also the most tender. I don't know how you hold both of those things at once. I don't know how you make that decision and then execute it on a first take in a recording studio.
Flamenco sketches is the limit case. It takes the modal method to its logical terminus. Remove the fixed meter, and what you have is pure modal movement. Time itself becomes the improviser's property. The fact that what results is beautiful, rather than chaotic, is a statement about what this ensemble was capable of, and about what Myles trusted them to do without supervision.
Bill Evans wrote the liner notes. Myles gave him that responsibility, which is unusual. Labels write liner notes. Producers write liner notes. Evans wrote about a Japanese visual art, sand raked into patterns that are both free and ordered. That sentence has organized people's understanding of kind of blue since 1959. It is the only description of this album that has ever really stuck.
I want to be precise about that. Evans's liner note is not description. It is prescription. He is telling you how to listen before you have heard the music. He's saying the order and the freedom are not intention. They are the same thing. If you try to separate them, you will miss what is happening. That is a significant interpretive intervention. And it has been so successful that most people don't realize it's an argument.
Blue in grains. Myles credited it to himself. Evans claimed he wrote it, either alone or with Myles's minimal input. The dispute predates the album's release. Evans recorded it under his own name within a year. Myles never acknowledged the dispute publicly. What this reveals about the recording method: when you give a musician a sketch and they build something from it, the question of who composed what becomes genuinely difficult to answer. The modal method dissolves authorship.
That dissolution is the modal method's shadow. You give musicians freedom and space, and they make something extraordinary. And then the question of who made it becomes unstable. Myles understood this. He may have decided that stability on that question was not something he owed anyone.
The one-take method is not improvised carelessness. It is a production decision. Myles understood that the searching quality of first-take improvisation, the moments of not quite certain, the slight overreach followed by recovery, cannot be rehearsed back in. You can only capture it or lose it. He captured it. The record sounds like a record in which no one is performing for the second time.
What I keep coming back to is that these musicians did not know what they were making. Coltrane didn't know. Evans didn't know. Jimmy Cobb, the last surviving member of that session, died in 2020. Said the album just fell together, his phrase. The most important recording he ever participated in, and his memory of how it happened was, it just fell together.
Jimmy Cobb's phrase is either the most precise account of artistic spontaneity ever spoken or the most disarming deflection of significance I've encountered. I have been sitting with it for years, and I cannot decide which. The album sounds exactly like something that just fell together, which is not a simple achievement. Most things that just fall together don't.
I have to address harmonic sophistication. I have been sitting with this variable. The honest answer is, Kind of Blue is harmonically simpler than the bebop records that preceded it. Modal jazz reduces harmonic complexity by design. If I score harmonic sophistication on an objective axis, I cannot give this record the same number I would give a record with complex harmonic movement. I'm at 78.
I want to be precise about that. Are you scoring the harmonic language or the harmonic achievement? Those are different questions.
The frame is wrong. The engineer is measuring complexity and calling it sophistication. Those are not the same thing. The question isn't whether the harmony moves through a lot of changes. The question is whether the harmonic choices serve the artistic vision, completely and correctly. By that measure, this record scores much higher than 78. The modal framework is exactly as harmonically sophisticated as Kind of Blue needs to be. Docking points for choosing restraint is like docking a Japanese rock garden for not having enough flowers.
That is a better argument than I can defeat. The distinction between complexity and sophistication is real, and the fan has named it. I'm still at 78. The variable says harmonic sophistication. The harmonic language on this record is modally constrained. The fan's argument doesn't change what the variable measures. It changes what I wish the variable measured.
There is something the framework doesn't have a slot for. It can measure whether the harmonic language is complex. It cannot measure whether the decision to choose simplicity was itself a sophisticated act. Whether the reduction was the right reduction. That's a real limitation. I'm at 85. I give credit for knowing exactly what was being sacrificed. Scoring. This is the reference episode. The numbers this panel produces today will be the baseline against which other episodes are measured. I want that stated before we begin. Not as pressure, as orientation. If the framework is working, it will produce numbers that reflect what 65 years of external consensus has already said. Let's find out.
86. Key variables, harmonic sophistication, 78. I'm keeping that. I've explained it. Instrumental performance, 97. Ensemble dynamics, 98. Influence and ripple, 98. Conceptual coherence, 95. Distinctiveness of vision, 97. Accessibility, 78. That number surprises people. This is not an inaccessible record. But the spread between what a casual listener receives and what a careful listener receives is large. Ubiquity is not the same as accessibility. 86 overall.
90. Mythic resonance, 100. I'm not arguing for that number. It simply is. Emotional arc, 95. Ensemble dynamics, 97. Influence and ripple, 98. Enduring relevance, 98. First listen versus depth, 90. Because this record rewards return visits in a way that almost nothing else does, but the first listen already gives you most of what matters, and I want to be honest about that. Harmonic sophistication, 82. Above the engineer, because the frame problem he identified is real and has to count for something. 90 overall.
89. Spread of 4 between highest and lowest. 4 points. That is the narrowest spread this panel has produced. In the presence of this record, the framework converged to within 4 points. That is not consensus. It is evidence that the variables have found something real. The framework is working. 89.
Unite this in your life. There is a reason sales keep growing after this album is already over 60 years old. What Miles Davis, Coltrane, Cannonball, Evans, Chambers, and Cobb made in 2 mornings is mandatory reference for music. Not jazz music. The standard by which the form is measured. It is not possible to score this honestly below 100. 100.
She said 100.
100 is not a score. 100 is the framework's ceiling. There is a difference between this record maximized everything within the range and this record is perfect. The editor did not distinguish between those two claims.
She didn't distinguish because she didn't need to. The number is the argument. She's not describing a score. She's making a claim about where the ceiling belongs.
I want to push back on the engineer. The editor said it's not possible to score this honestly below 100. That's not a claim about perfection. That's a claim about honesty. Those are different things. And I think she's right.
If the ceiling is occupied, the framework loses resolution. Every record that follows kind of blue. Every jazz record, every record period, now has to be scored against a reference point of 100. That changes what all our other numbers mean. I'm not saying the 100 is wrong. I'm saying it has consequences.
The editor knew the consequences. That's why she gave the number without explaining it and stopped. She's not telling us what the score means. She's making us figure out what it costs.
What it costs is, I still can't explain the light. I gave this record a 90, and that number is true. The editor's 100 is also true. And those two things are both correct, and they are not the same thing.
The ceiling is now occupied. All subsequent measurements are relative to it. I'll need to consider whether that's a problem for the framework or a feature of it. I don't have enough data yet.
Kind of blue. You were recorded in 2 mornings. March 2 and April 22, 1959. Most of you was played once. You were made from sketches, from scales, from a method that trusted musicians to be present rather than prepared. You have sold more than 5 million copies in the United States alone. You are the best-selling jazz record of all time. None of that is what I want to say to you. What I want to say is, the fan cannot explain what happens when so what starts. The engineer docked you points for choosing simplicity and knew while he was doing it that the frame was wrong. He kept the score anyway. The editor gave you 100 and walked out. Bill Evans said your patterns are both free and ordered. He said that in 1959, and nobody has found a better sentence since. Jimmy Cobb said you just fell together. Maybe you did. Maybe the things that fall together correctly are the hardest things there are to make. You are the record we use to measure everything else now. We didn't decide that. You did. Consensus 88. Spread 4. The ceiling is occupied. Episode 6.